Good morning, children. This is the second video of History, Class 6, and today I'll explain the second chapter of History, and the name of the chapter is The Egyptian Civilization. The Egyptian civilization arose in Egypt in the valley of river Nile, and due to the annual floods in the river, it made the adjoining floods plain fertile so that the farmers can grow more and more crops. And as we know that it was situated near the river Nile, but without the Nile River, Egypt would have been a desert, and that is why Egypt is also called the gift of Nile. Now let's know what are the sources of Egyptian civilization. The ancient Egyptian civilization is based on archaeological excavations, inscriptions, and official documents, and these have helped us to reconstruct the history of Egypt. Now let's talk about the origin. Now, what do you mean by origin? Origin means the point from which something starts. So, by 3300 BCE, villages in the Nile Valley had grown into towns, and these towns were ruled by rich and powerful kings. Thus, Egypt was divided into two kingdoms, the Upper Egypt and the Lower Egypt. But in around 3100 BCE, a king of Upper Egypt conquered Lower Egypt to unite the two kingdoms. Now let's move towards the period of ancient Egypt. It was divided into three periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Now, first, let's talk about the Old Kingdom. This period extended from 2649 BCE to 2150 BCE, and this period is also called the Age of Pyramids. Now let's move towards the Middle Kingdom. This period extended from 2055 BCE to 1700 BCE, and in about 1650 BCE, Egypt was invaded by Hyksos tribe. Next was the New Kingdom. This period extended roughly from 1550 BC to 1070 BC, and after this, the empire entered a period of decline. Next was the social classes. In Egyptian civilization, the society was also consisted of many classes, and the ruler was called the pharaoh and was treated as god, and he took all major decisions concerning the empire. Next came the priest, then came the nobles, officials, and scribes, followed by merchants, artisans, and farmers. So now let's talk about how was the life of the people in the Egyptian civilization. When we talk about the family, the father was the head of the family, and the birth of daughters was also welcome. And the women belonging to the poor families worked on fields and looked after their houses. Whereas when we talk about the rich women, they led a better lives, and many of them could read and write. Now let's talk about the rich people. Those who were rich persons, they lived in a big houses which was decorated with frescoes and paintings. They also decorate their houses with different types of paintings. Both men and women wore jewelry made of gold and precious stones. Thus, all the household work was done by servants or slaves. Next was the poor people. As we talk about the poor people in this Egyptian civilization, the poor worked as servants or as laborers in rich houses. Their houses were small, often consisting of only one room. And in terms of jewelry, they wore the jewelry made of cheap metals, which was decorated with pieces of brightly painted clay. Next was the amusements. Singing and dancing were popular forms of amusements. People also played musical instruments, and for them, hunting and fishing were popular pastimes. Now, let's talk about the food. Wheat, millet, and barley were the main crops. Thus, people ate fruits and vegetables, and wine was a popular drink among the rich. Now, let's talk about the religion of the Egyptian civilization. The Egyptians worshipped many gods and goddesses, and each god was associated with a particular aspects of life. And the chief god was Amun, Re or Ra, which was considered to be the sun god, and he was the king of all gods. The other gods that were worshipped were Thor, the moon god. Next was Horus, which was considered to be the sky god. And last was Anubis, the god of mummification. And each god had a separate temple and a priest. Therefore, Egyptians preserved their dead by mummifying their bodies. They covered the dead body with herbs and spices and then wrapped it in fine linen cloth. Such a preserved body is called a mummy. Now let's see what were the different occupations of Egyptian civilization. Most people were engaged in agriculture, and because the land was very fertile and there was the regular supply of water from the river Nile. Thus, people were engaged in other occupations also, such as pottery making, spinning, weaving, glass making, carpentry work, metalworking, poultry farming, and fishing were some occupations of the Egyptian civilization. Now let's talk about the trade and commerce of the Egyptian civilization. Trade was an important activity, and goods were transported over land by camels and donkeys, whereas boats and small ships were used to send goods along the river Nile. Now let's see what were the major achievements of the Egyptian civilization. In terms of architecture, the Egyptians were great builders and constructed many pyramids and temples, such as the Great Pyramid at Giza, the Sphinx, and the temple at Abu Simbel is equally famous and which was built by Ramesses II. And when we talk about the mathematics, the Egyptians had made great progress in mathematics as they knew fractions and the decimal system and the four basic operations of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And they put their knowledge to use in the construction of pyramids. Next was the medicine. The Egyptians knew a lot about human astronomy, as we know that the Egyptian mummies, despite being thousands of years old, are still well preserved, and this shows their advanced knowledge of medicine. Next was the astronomy. The Egyptians studied the movements of heavenly bodies to predict natural phenomena. They counted years by observing the stars. Now let's talk about the Egyptian script. The Egyptian system of writing is called hieroglyphics, which means sacred writing, and they used pictures to represent words and symbols to express the ideas. Thus, this script was written from right to left. Here, the script was written on stone walls and clay tablets, but later, paper sheets made from papyrus reeds were used. Let's see what was the cause for the decline of the Egyptian civilization. The Assyrians and Persians conquered the Nile region. Later on, Greek and Roman armies took over the rich Nile Valley. And thirdly, Egypt continued to influence its conquerors through the richness of its heritage and the awesome magnificence of its physical remains. So, children, this was the explanation of this chapter. I hope that you all have understood it well. Take care. Thank you.